I'm very pleased to introduce Steve Ackerman, who will be presenting on the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald from the perspective of the weather, the ship, and the song by Gordon Lightfoot. Please join me in welcoming Steve.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I always find these very learning experiences for me as well. I can imagine by looking at the color of your hair of many of you, mine would be gray if I lived at Berlin. But you probably remember when you heard about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I mean, it was, for me personally, I was an undergrad at a school in Oneonta, New York, majoring in physics and meteorology, and my job was to hang weather maps, one of my jobs, in the morning. And on that morning, the day after, is when I went in and learned that this big ship sunk on a lake. And I just could not imagine it. And I still, now I can imagine it, but I still don't quite understand how it went down. But I have learned a lot, and I'll be talking about those things that I have learned, although as you'll see, there are still some questions about how did this ship actually sink. Even though there was a great investigation. If anybody wants to take a look at this, we can do that afterwards. But that's the Transportation Safety Board report that came out after the accident. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the ship, the storm, and the song. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the ship, just kind of put it in perspective, some of the facts. Then I'll talk about the storm, just a little bit about the storm, how special it was. And then I'll talk about the song. Again, just little snippets here and there. And then I'll integrate them all together. And we'll look at what was going on with the ship, the storm, and how that's reflected in the song with regard to the last couple of days of the Edmund Fitzgerald before it sank. It's a really interesting story. I think the interest here that people generally have, including myself, I think really demonstrates that it is one of the most popular shipwrecks in history. I think the only other one that might surpass it would be the sinking of the Titanic. Now, some credit Gordon Lightfoot's song as the one that really helped popularize it. I'm not so sure that's the case. I mean, it let people in Mississippi know what would have happened up here. But I think the interest around the Great Lakes, there's always been interest in shipwrecks and in the mystery surrounding this ship as well. Although his songs certainly helped popularize it and raise issues around safety. So the ship, as we know, it just celebrated the 50th anniversary. I hate calling it an anniversary, but the event, when it went down on November 10th, 1975, that's when it sank. It's a very interesting story. It's an interesting mystery. It's an interesting weather event. But it's also important to remember that all 29 crew members died during that shipwreck. At the very end, I will list all the names of those 29 people, what their age was, what their job was, and where they were from. Because I do think it's important to remember, as interesting as this is, the impact goes beyond the lost lives of these 29 individuals. It seeps out to their entire families. At the time, and even currently, it was the worst shipping disaster on the Great Lakes in 10 years when it occurred. And we haven't had one like that since the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And I think part of that is associated with some of the follow-on requirements that happened after the ship went down. It weighed 13,632 tons. It was 729 feet long, 75 feet wide. What they wanted to do was to get it to the Sault Ste. Marie locks, through the locks there, and possibly into the Lawrence River. The ships were constrained to the size of being able to go through the locks. And of course, the size was, it could be no bigger than 730 feet long and no wider than 76 feet. So they constructed it to be exactly with the fill in the locks to get through it. When it was launched on June 7th, 1958, 15,000 people showed up to see it launched. And that's why I think while the song helped popularize it and get the name out there, I think there has always been interest in this ship, which went by a variety of different names, one of which was the pride of the American flag. Also the pride of the American side, also called the Fitz. It had a lot of good names because it was so famous.
Where was it built?
It was built in, I'll come back to where it was built. I'm trying to remember now that the town where it was built. What was interesting is that it was built differently than typically you would build these ships. So typically you would build them all at once. In this ship, and when they built this one, they built it in 3 separate sections in 3 different places, then shipped it to where they assembled it. And when they did that, rather than use rivets, which is what they typically would do, but it would take longer, they welded those sections together. And this is one of the things that has come up when they look at why did it go down. It was done differently than the other big ships that had happened. And that's where you can see it in here. There are 3 central cargo holds that they were loaded through these 21 watertight hatches. So these are the hatches. I'll be mentioning those a couple of times. When they did the hatchways, what they would do is they would load it up with talconite pellets. We'll take a look at what they look like in a moment. And then once they were loaded up, the crew members would have to put on these hatchways, which had weighed 7 tons each. So obviously they didn't lift it. They had mechanical help. And then they had to clamp it down with 68 special clamps all the way down to seal it and to make sure that the cargo was in place. Because it was so big, I mean, it was designed to break records, and it broke many records in terms of how much iron ore it would transport. Most of the time it was going, of course, to make automobiles in Detroit.
And they call it the Toledo Express.
The Toledo Express was another name. Its home port was Toledo. Its winter rover was Toledo. That's where, not Cleveland, as the song says, as we'll see. The storm. During November 9th to the 10th, 1975, there was an intense November gale. It's these mid-latitude storm systems that we're very familiar with up here, with the cold fronts and the warm fronts. It hit the Great Lakes with storm force winds, which means they were blowing steady at 55 to 63 miles per hour. Gusts could even get up to 75, 80 miles per hour. But these are just steady winds, constant winds at that wind speed on Lake Superior. This is not all that unique to get these storms. We have gotten these in the past. A couple of real famous ones. One was one that occurred in 1913. It was called the White Hurricane. It hit the Great Lakes region, killed over 200 people in the Great Lakes regions because of the storm. I think it was 1913 again. It was a little different than the storm that sank the Edmund Fitzgerald in the sense that it was this White Hurricane was really 2 storms that kind of merged together. Another storm, which is really famous up here in the Great Lakes region, particularly Wisconsin and Minnesota, was the Armistice Day storm of 1940 that occurred November 10th and 11th. That storm took down 3 ships in Lake Superior, and more relevantly, that we might be familiar with, it killed over 50 duck hunters in Wisconsin, and over 20-something in Minnesota. And the reason why was, remember, 1940, weather forecasting is still pretty crude. And on the 9th, it was a beautiful day. And it was duck hunting season. And so they went out duck hunting in very light clothing. And then the storm hit. And all of a sudden the temperatures dropped 40 degrees, wind speeds picked up, and that's how people typically died due to overexposure. Some of them did survive by going underneath their boats and sleeping out the night, surviving through the night. If you have never heard, how many people have heard of this storm? The Armistice Day storm? Okay. For those of you who haven't, the storm, if you ever saw the Tacoma Narrow Bridge, you know, the one that went like this and then fell down, same storm. That's what it did when it hit the West Coast. So we've had other storms like this as well. I'll talk about one that we had in the 1990s as well. And then the song. 1975, Gordon Lightfoot, he read a Newsweek magazine article called The Cruelest Month, where they talked about the loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald. At the time, he was working on a melody based on some Irish tune, and he liked that melody, and he was working on it, and then he saw this, and memorialized this event by putting words to that song. And it came out, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It reached number 2 on the United States Billboard chart and was number 1 hit in Canada. It's Canadian. But it's a good song. I really enjoyed it. One of the things I had learned as we were looking at the 50th anniversary of this is that when he first played it for a recording or for the album, it was sort of a cold thing. They had extra time. And so his producer said, well, why don't you play that song you've been working on? And so they did, just cold like that. And that's the song that you typically hear on the radio. And they tried to do it again a couple of times, but it was never the emotional impact that it had the first time they sang it. And these are some of the words. So every now and then, if you see italic yellow text in quotes, then this is where I'm just taking things out of his song. And of course it goes, the opening stanza is, the legend lives on from the Chippewa on down to the big lake they call Michigumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. If you feel like singing along, you can do it. I'm not. I'm going to kind of do the beat, if you will. But, so a couple of things about this. One is, first off, the song is pretty accurate about what happened. But I was a faculty at UW-Madison, and so we always like look at, well, you know, that's not quite right. So I'm going to tend to point out the things that he had wrong there, or that should be corrected, if you will. And one of those is Gitchigumi. The Ojibwe actually call the lake Gitchigami, meaning be a great sea, which I think is such a better name than what we call now Lake Superior. But in Longfellow's poem to Hiawatha, he called it Gitchigumi, and that's why it got picked up, and that's why he called it in his song as well. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy, and that's because it's so darn cold. When I first came up here from New York, I mean, I grew up on Long Island, if you didn't figure out the accent, so I did a lot of swimming. When I came here to the Great Lakes, I could not believe how cold that water is. I mean, I couldn't even, the first time I went to Lake Michigan, I could not go swimming, and it was July. It was just too cold. I couldn't get in there. Because of that cold, what happens is when they die and they go down to the bottom, or they're drowned in the water, typically what would happen is you'd have biological activities would occur that would start to decompose the bodies, and that would generate gases that would float the body to the surface. Lake Superior is too cold, so those biological activities don't happen, so the bodies don't float to the surface. And that's why it never gives up its dead. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighs empty. These are the iron ore. They're called talconite pellets. I'm going to pass them around so you can get a sense of how heavy they are. If you want to take one, feel free to take one as well. But just pass them around. This is what they would load those hatchways Yeah, they would just roll these down. They're like marbles. They would just roll right down chutes, and they would fill it up, and then as soon as that one of those 3 cargo bays got fully full, they would seal everything down and then move on to the rest of the ship. A couple of things about Talconite pellets. They're heavy. If you have squirrels in your backyard that you don't like in a slingshot, try to remove them. That doesn't work for me, but they're also slightly absorbent. So they can absorb about 7% of their weight. And then if you pile them up, the water, once it goes in that pile, is not going to come out. It'll fill the air spaces in between. It'll be like grains of sand. You put water on a pile of sand, that water doesn't pour out, it fills up the air sockets. And we'll come back to why that's important as we go through this. 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed in. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. As big freighters go, it was bigger than most. Of course, when it was built, it was the biggest. By the time it went down, there were other ones that were longer than it. But the Fitzgerald was the one that held many of its records. It was launched June 7, 1958, from River Rouge, Michigan. That's where it was built. And she was the largest ship in North America's Great Lakes, and remains to be the largest to have sunk, thankfully. When it was launched, I should also go back, and Edmund Fitzgerald was the head of the insurance company, the Northwestern Insurance Company. His family was actually in Great Lakes shipping. He wasn't, but it was a really good investment. And so that's why they built the ship. They paid the money to build the ship. They didn't operate it, but they did make a profit off it. Fitzgerald, who was the president at the time, did not want the ship named after him. And in fact, the only way it got named after him is that when the board, when he missed a board meeting, that's when they voted in. So a lot of interesting stories around this ship, one of which, of course, was the launch as well. His wife got to break the magnum of champagne. Of course, as you should launch all boats, although it's a waste of champagne. She had to hit it 3 times before the bottle broke. Yeah, and then when it did break, you know, it's not the bottle that's going to launch it. They have to knock the wedges off that are going to make the boat slide into the water. And they had a little trouble doing that, but eventually they did, and it generated a huge wave and went across the area there, the channel where it was, generated a big wave and banged up against the side. And not only that, it was so scary, apparently, in terms of the size of the wave that it generated, that somebody had a heart attack and died. Oh. Right? Of course, some sailors then would say, well, that was, you know, the premonition of this is bad luck. But it was also a great ship to be a visitor on, because they spared no cost in terms of VIPs being on here and being comfortable and eating really well. You know, steak and lobster every Sunday. And you know, the cooks were very well known for their capability to make really good meals. The other thing we want to point out again, because this will come back later on, is the engine was updated, you know, to make it go faster. It could go 16 miles per hour, which is kind of moving along given the weight that it's carrying. But they also changed the load line 3 times, in 1969, 1971, and 1973. They changed it by 3 feet, 3 1/4 inches, which means you could take more cargo on, and the boat sits lower in the water as well. It was easy. Now, I guess it wasn't easy. They were able to do it. Now, as part of the outcome of this disaster, you're not allowed to do that. You got to go to what you were designed for. Concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. They weren't going to Cleveland. They don't make cars in Cleveland. They were going to Detroit. The amount of ore that this boat would carry in a particular load would be able to make 7,500 automobiles. So they wanted to get into Detroit. And with the wows, I'm glad to hear that, because hopefully you're thinking, we're not talking about cars today.
Right,
We're
not
talking about cars in 1975. Ford Galaxy type cars.
Yeah.
Those things are heavy. But that's what they were able to do. This is the path that the Fitzgerald took on that fateful day. So they left Duluth, headed up. They wanted to, get to Sault Ste. Marie so they can get to Detroit and do unloading. If you look at this path, of course, they're after making money, right? That's why they increased the load line so they can carry more ore. It's all about making money. It's a business. So when you think that way, you probably think, well, why did they go to the northern route then? Right? This still is pretty deep water. Why not take the southern route? Shorter distance, less fuel, more profit. And that was the plan initially. And of course, they changed their plan eventually because of
The storm.
the weather. Yes. It's all about the weather. I'm a weather guy as well. So if you have any questions, if you don't know an answer to a question that I have, just guess it's the weather. And so speaking of the weather, let's take a look at the birth of this extratropical cyclone. So these extratropical cyclones, we call them winter storms. You can call them November gales. If you watch the news or track weather, it's when you have these cold fronts and warm fronts together, the storms that gave us some interesting weather this past week, some snow for as well. And in 1975, remember, weather forecasting is really just beginning. Numerical weather forecasting is really just beginning. We're really beginning to make numerical with computer forecasts. In 1975, it's still only about 10 years old at best. And on Saturday, November 8th, 1975, it's a gorgeous day across most of the United States, just like on the day before the 1940 storm as well. The Edmund Fitzgerald is on the smooth Lake Superior, and it's ready to get its next load of these iron ores, the pellets being rolled down into the ore of the ship, the core of the ship. And they're being loaded up again in Duluth, Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin Harbor. If we look at the weather map, on this particular day, this is what it looked like in 1975, where, as the song says, the good ship and crew was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. Well, they didn't really come early, right, because we've had these storms before. But it rhymes. And it's important to have that beat, otherwise the storm wouldn't be famous. This is what the weather map looked like. At 7 in the morning Eastern time, or 6 in the morning our time. Of course, these are cold fronts, right? You're probably all familiar with us, with the blue and the triangles. Triangles are pointing to the direction it's going in. And this is an occluded front where the kind of warm front and cold front get mixed up together. There's precipitation area in there as well. But the thing I want to make you focus on as we look at a couple of these maps is these blue lines. Those blue solid lines are lines at constant pressure. And what's important is not what the amount of that pressure is. What's important is the spacing between those lines. As those lines get tighter and tighter together, that means the wind is getting stronger and stronger. And so on this map, there's nothing really eventful with regard to any of the winds. Of course, if you're a meteorologist, one of the things you look at when you see this map is this low right there. You look at that low in the Panhandle regions and you start thinking, uh-oh, what's going on? Particularly, let's take a look at where the jet stream is. Because what we find is that when you look in November, the storms that hit the Great Lakes tend to originate in two areas. One is Alberta Clipper. It's in Alberta, Canada, sorry. So the storm will get organized there. It will work together with the upper air and the jet stream, and then it'll just come by and just clip the Great Lakes region. And I'm guessing you've heard, I know I've heard them on the news call these Alberta clippers. They originate there and they clip the Great Lakes. The other area where we see a generation of these storms that affect the Great Lakes is right here in the panhandles of Oklahoma or Texas, just east of the Rockies. As the Rockies, when those storms hit the Rockies, they kind of get lost. They get to the other side of the Rockies and everything stretches down and the storm gets reorganized again, right in this panhandle regions. And then these are the paths they tend to take once they form, and down here they head a little bit to the southeast and hook around and go right to the Great Lakes regions. And we call those panhandle hookers. Come on. You won't hear the news, television news call those panhandle hookers. We do have some of us do have a little sense of humor. And of course, that's that low pressure that I showed on the previous map. That's where it is. So that's why we're thinking, what does this mean for 1975? Day 2 with the Fitz on November 9th, 1975. It's loading up again in the Superior Duluth docks, being loaded up with enough of those iron ores to make 7,500 automobiles. These iron ore pellets, these talconite pellets, were a really big break in discovery and in shipping, because now you can really load these ships really efficiently and really quickly. And that's clearly what they do. They roll them down like marbles into these chutes, and then they put up 21 hatchways put down in the big bay of the regions that require 68 special clamps then. And those special clamps have to be done by hand all the way around. And shortly before 2 p.m., the Fitzgerald departs into the open waters of Lake Superior. Just looking at any typical day. It's the end of the season, for sure, the shipping season. November 9th, what does the weather map look like now at 7 in the morning, Eastern time, 6 in the morning, our time? And again, now what you can see is that low pressure is now getting organized. Suddenly we have a cold front with it and a warm front, and it's beginning to do that climatological track, that panhandle hooker, start getting ready to get up towards the Great Lakes. You can see again, some of the blue line is getting a little bit more spaced together, which again means the wind speeds are picking up as it heads up towards the Great Lakes regions. But again, still nothing really, it's all beginning to get organized, the storm system. On November 9th, the SS Arthur Anderson captain, Bernie Cooper. Again, the Fitzgerald's not the only ship on the Great Lakes at this time. There's a number of ships on there. One of them is the Anderson. It is also loaded up with talconite. And the Anderson and the Fitzgerald are going to actually travel together. It's not uncommon. They're going basically to the same place. They're both on Lake Superior. Let's travel together so they can talk and make decisions together if they need be. And Bernie would recall that was one of those special days on Lake Superior. Just ripples on the water, sunny and warm for November. And as they departed, they could see the Edmund Fitzgerald. And they'll sail together until the last journey of the Fitzgerald. So you can imagine that if you've gone to the lakes when they're nice and calm, that's the kind of day that they began on November 9th, 1975. November 9th at 7 p.m., and we were looking at the maps at 7 a.m. At 7 p.m., the National Weather Service, which is still pretty new, issued a gale warning for Lake Superior, which means the steady winds would be 40 to 46 miles per hour. Not a wind I want to be in, particularly in November. They also predicted the winds to be from the northeasterly directions during the night, shifting to the northwest or north by the afternoon of November 10th. Again, remember, numerical weather prediction back in 1975, one-day forecast in 1975 were as good as our 7-day forecast today. So we're still learning a lot about doing forecasting via computer and solving physical equations. At about 2 a.m., November 10th, the National Weather Service upgraded the gale warning to a storm warning, which means the steady winds are going to be 55 to 63 miles per hour. Which means you're going to get wind gusts in the 70s, 80 mile per hour. And they're predicting the northeast winds to be 40 to 57 miles per hour, becoming northwesterly, and waves 8 to 15 feet high. This is another area where we've really improved, is forecasting wave height in comparison to what we could do in 1975. At around 2 a.m., the captains of the Anderson and the Fitzgerald discussed the threatening weather, and they decided to change their route to a more northerly route. So they were going to do the southerly, but they changed it to the northerly. And the reason why was because they were expecting winds from the northwest at 40 to 57 miles per hour. And so if they would have stayed here, down here, they would have all this open water for that wind to blow over. And that open water is called fetch. And the more fetch you have, the bigger a wave you can generate. By going more towards the Canadian coastline, they're now protected by the shoreline. Right? One, friction is going to slow the wind down because they got trees and buildings there. But also you don't have much of a fetch, so you're not going to be buffered by that strong wind. So that's why they went the more northerly route instead of the southerly route. The other place I want to point out here, because this comes up a couple of times, is right around Caribou Island, right in this area, right in here. It gets shallower. This water in here and where it went down, it's 500 feet deep. But this gets shallower, to 20-something feet or so. So it's still deep, but it's still much shallower than where most of the Great Lakes are, or the Lake Superior is. At 3 a.m. on November 10th, the winds are reported as coming from the northeast at 42 knots, which means about 49 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour, and they're traveling together. The Fitzgerald is out ahead than the Anderson for a couple of reasons. One is it left port a little bit sooner, and two, it's got a more powerful engine, so we can go 16 miles per hour, which the Anderson can't, so it stays out ahead of the Anderson. Not only are they talking, but the Anderson, because the Fitzgerald's up ahead of it, can see it with its radar as well. And at 7 a.m., the storm passed by Marquette, Michigan, and starts across Lake Superior. And this is what that map looks like, right? So now, you can see those blue lines are now packed together. And that's why they're getting 45, 50 mile per hour sustained winds over the Great Lakes regions. You can see this mid-latitude cyclone, as we call them, is now well developed. You got a very clearly defined cold front and warm front. And it's reached its peak when you get those occluded fronts where they kind of merge together. That's an indication that the storm has reached its peak intensity and is likely to start dying. And not dying, but weakening as well. And as the song goes, and late that night when the ship bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? So the forecast is, again, we're still learning a lot back in 1975. The other thing I want to point out that is also useful, I think, because this is another tool that really, back in 1975, was just beginning. And that was the satellite imagery. That's become really common now when you're going to be looking at where the weather is. These GOES satellite, they're fixed up along the equator, so it rotates around at the same speed as the Earth rotates, and so you can watch cloud systems move by, and that's what we routinely do now. November 10th, 1975, this is what the geostationary was showing us. So here's that storm system we were just looking at. And of course, Fitzgerald is celebrating its 50th anniversary. The GO satellite program is also celebrating its 50th anniversary. It began in October 1975 as well. And the other place I like to point out, since we're all from Wisconsin, Wisconsin is recognized as the birthplace of weather satellites. It all began here. In Madison, there was a faculty there who had the first successful satellite mission to look back at Earth and take pictures. And then he was the inspiration that pushed for this program for the National Weather Service, NOAA, to have and to run. But again, this is brand new. So their weather forecasters are excited to get this, but we don't know how to use it yet, other than watching cloud systems move around. Now this satellite data routinely gets put into the weather forecast models. Back then it was a nice, pretty picture, but important. When the gales of November came slashing, when afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. So what I'm showing here is weather observations at two places. One, Marquette, Michigan. We're looking at wind speed on here with regard to time, starting on November 9th, going to November 11th. And up here, we're looking at Sault Ste. Marie. What we're looking at here is in the solid black lines are the wind speed, the sustained wind speed. So at Marquette, it's running about 30 knots, so we're talking 40 miles per hour, roughly. And then these are the wind gusts that also get recorded. Wind gusts tend to blow things off. Steady winds make it really hard to travel. And then the other thing is the two color lines. This is the pressure at Marquette, and the blue line up here is the pressure being recorded at Sault Ste. Marie. And one of the things I'd like to point out is, one, this is where the Fitzgerald went down. That was the time period it went down. You can see we almost have peak sustained winds at Sault Ste. Marie, which is right where it was headed. And then the other thing, back in the 1940 storm, we didn't have numerical weather predictions. We did a lot of forecasting, or back then they did forecasting based on sayings, right? Like red sky at night sells delight, red sky at morning sells take warning. That's just telling you cloud systems move from west to east. The other one, fast rise after low foretells stronger blow. So you get a fast rise in the pressure after you hit your low. That tells you the wind is going to get really, really strong. And that's clearly what we're seeing here as well. So some of these folklore forecasts are actually pretty accurate based on experience. Would I want to rely on them? No, certainly not. Oh, the other thing I want to point out is, again, it's good to give artistic license, but they're not having hurricane west winds. To be a Category 1 hurricane, the weakest hurricane, you have to have winds, steady winds of 74 to 94 miles per hour. We're only getting gusts up to 74. We're not having sustained winds. Having said that, would I have wanted to be on the lake at this particular time with 55 miles? No, thank you. On the afternoon of November 10th, a wind shift was clearly evident, as the storm suggests and as we begin to see with the weather forecasting. At 2:45 p.m., the winds have backed, which means they went counterclockwise. So they're now out of the northwest at 42 knots, or roughly 49, 50 miles per hour, with waves being recorded at 12 to 16 feet high. So back then, the way we did weather observations and lake wave height was from the ships themselves. So this 12 to 16 foot wave means there's a ship on there that made that observation. Similarly, they were making weather observations from the ship. One of the things we've learned from this, of course, is it's much better to have weather moored instruments on the lake doing routine measurements rather than whenever the ship can actually have time to make it. You get more of them and they're more accurate and more consistent. And around 3:30 p.m., the Fitzgerald contacts the Anderson and reports a fence rail down, 2 vents lost or damaged, and a list. So when a ship has a list, that means it's tilted. And what that means is it's taking on water. So they know they have water coming in. How that water is coming in is the question of the day. But they know water is coming in because they have that list. And the storm Fury at that time also closed the Sault Ste. Marie locks. So the weather gets too nasty, they're going to just shut things down. And that's what they did at Sault Ste. Marie. The other thing I want to point out here, because I only recently realized this, in my mind, when I see a fence rail down, the thing that came to my mind was like a snow fence that we have here. You know, you got those little things here, wind took it down. No, right, these are wires, strong wires, which implies that it's not the wind that's probably taking it down. It was probably something that went over the deck, an object that went over the deck that took that rail down. So it's a much more severe thing. The other thing that we'll come back to, the two vents lost. So the vents, you know, you're thinking on ships, you have those big white things. One of those things got lost, got blown away, either through an object taking them down or through a gust of wind. What that now means is that water can go directly down into the boat as well. So now there's ways the water can get in. A shift in that wind, again, is pretty important in terms to what happened to the Fitzgerald, because now what that means is, remember, they took the north route to be protected by the wind. Well, it turns out now they're up in that wind, they're up in this direction up here, and the wind's coming out of the northwest at 50 miles per hour. So that fetch, you can't get a bigger fetch on Lake Superior than that direction. And so that's what's going to generate the winds that are observed, the waves that are going to be observed 25, 30 feet high. How do you generate a wave height that high? There are really four main things. One is the wind speed and the steady wind speed, not the gusts. The gusts aren't going to do anything other than maybe set ripples up. So we need steady wind speed. The stronger the wind, the more water it can push, the bigger the waves are going to be. And the duration of the winds, right? It's got the longer the wind is, the stronger and longer it is, the more water it can push again. And that's what's going to generate the wave height. The fetch is the open distance of that water body. The bigger the fetch, the more water to move, the bigger the waves you can generate. And then, of course, the weather, the water depth. And again, where we are here, that water depth is on the order of 500 feet. So you're going to generate bigger waves on Lake Superior than you are on Lake Erie, which is not 500 feet deep. We can theoretically look at what those maximum wave height could be given a particular wind speed, and that's what this blue line is. That's the maximum wave height, so that's kind of what you would get on an ocean, if you will, with that kind of wind speed. And these X's are actually observations that the ships on the lake were making. So they were making wave heights of 20, 25, and even 30 feet high in one particular case. So think about that, right? That's bigger than that ceiling. And when supper time came, the old cook came on deck saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed you." Right? What he's pointing out there is they're in a nasty situation where the water is really moving the boat around. And again, when I first thought of this, I just thought of the boat going like this, but now you see it and you can see pictures of other boats. It's not like the boat is just going up and down. It's twisting as well as it goes through it, because remember, it's 729 feet long and only 75 feet wide. So it's like an old wooden ruler. That's the kind of shape it's in. So it gets twisted as it goes through this rough water. In 2006, one thing we like to do is, weather guys, weather people, is to take today's weather model, get the observations from the past, and run it again, and see what would today's models have said. And as it turns out, today's models are pretty accurate in making the forecast for this storm. So accurate enough, now we don't know, but they would have known if they would have taken that northern route, they would have been in the worst part of the storm with regard to the fetch. So we did this in 2006. A colleague of mine, me and a colleague down in Georgia just did it again this summer and pretty much got the same thing. The accuracy of the forecast is much more accurate. The most intense part of the storm, as we'll see, was occurring when the ship went down, actually. And with wind speeds, sustained winds of running around 58 miles per hour, that would generate waves of 25 feet high. So, again, pretty tough sea or lake to be on at the time. With all that, with the howling winds going on, the snow, the sea, the nasty weather, the precipitation, around 3:20 in the afternoon, McSorley, who's the captain of the Fitzgerald, talks to Cooper on the radio. Remember, he's the Anderson captain. And he says, "Anderson, this is the Fitzgerald. I have sustained some topside damage. I have a fence rail laid down, 2 vents lost or damaged, and a list. I'm checking, which means slowing down. Will you stay by me till I get to Whitefish Bay?" Right, that's where both of them are going. And of course, the response is, "Charlie on that, Fitzgerald, do you have your pumps going?" "Yes, both of them." And these pumps aren't little pumps. These things can do 7,000 gallons a minute. So they're trying to generate, they know they have water in the boat because they have a list. So they're putting the pumps on, hoping to get rid of the water and get righted. But of course, if it's getting in where those taconite pellets are, one, the pellets are absorbing 7% additional weight, and the water's filling the spaces. So it's hard to get that water out if it's getting in with the car. The wind intensifies and around 4 in the afternoon. Gusts blow away the Fitzgerald's radar antenna, knocks out power at the remote navigation station at Whitefish Bay. And at 5 p.m., the lighthouse at Standard Rock north of Marquette, the closest observing station to the Fitzgerald at that moment, records a wind gust of 76 miles per hour. Right? And what all this means is that essentially the Fitzgerald is now blind as a ship. It has no radar, can't see where it's going if there's something in the way. And the navigation station at Whitefish Bay is also out, so we can't communicate with anybody. And so now what happens? The Fitzgerald is now going to talk to McSorley. McSorley is going to ask, well, get ahead of there. At 6 p.m., McSorley tells another ship captain, again, he has a bad list, lost both his radars to this wind gust, and he's taking heavy seas over the deck. One of the worst seas I've ever been in. And to me, that's an important sentence, because to me, what it says, he's the only captain on the Great Lakes at that time that says that. And he's an experienced captain as well. And the Anderson is 10 miles behind her. Right? What the Anderson's going to do now is give the Fitzgerald directions. Right? So if there's another boat coming, if the Anderson will pick them both up, it'll tell them, okay, there is another boat, but you'll be clear of it. You know, you're not on the path to run into it. And that's why they're talking with the Avogors, the Swedish vessel. At 7 p.m., a main hatch wave caved in, and he said, "Fellas, it's been good to know ya." That's the cook from the song. The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and the good ship and crew was in peril. And later that night, when its lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. While this phrase is very romantic, and it makes it sound like they knew what was going on, and they knew they were taking on water, right? That's why they were running their pumps. They're asking help in navigation, so they know it's not a pretty sight, but they don't know the danger that they're really in, that they're about to experience. Even though the song seems to reflect that or put that forward, they really don't know what it is. What they do know is they're taking on water. He uses the hatch waves, that phrase, 7 p.m. to make hatch wave came in. He's coming, and by him I mean Lightfoot, is doing this from the Department of Transportation Coast Guard investigation. This is the report that came from that. What they concluded was that water was getting into the hatchways. And so that's why he uses that in the original song. Of course, we don't know how water was getting in there. right? We hypothesize, but we don't know. We don't know because there were no survivors. And as we'll see, there were no witnesses as well. In that phrase, the families of the 29 sailors didn't like the conclusion of the water getting in through the hatchways because they weren't sealed well. Because the implication is then that the sailors didn't do their job, right? And that's why the ship went down. And while you can theorize that, there's no real hard evidence that that was happening. So Gordon Lightfoot got close to some of the family members, and after those conversations with them, he actually changed the words to at 7 p.m. it grew dark. It was then, he said, fellas, it's been good to know you. So in honor of the family members, he changed these. Of course, if you listen to the oldie stations, as I still do, you'll hear the original. That's the only one that they can play. But when he did live performances, he would sing the new versions in 2010. And I told the story once before that Ann, my wife and I went to see him, I think it was in 2012 or something. And you know, he's sing-alongs. Everybody sings along with him, no matter what the song is. Right? So they're all singing this, everybody, the whole audience is gung-ho, and I'm elbowing Ann and saying, watch this, watch this. And she's like, what are you talking about? And they come to this line, everybody in the audience is singing that top line. And he and his band are singing Yellow. And the whole audience all of a sudden just like, you know, like when you're singing a song and you forget the words, you kind of figure out what's going on. And then the phrase is over and everybody's back to the normal song. But it was good. And he's done that a couple of times, changed the words a couple of times. You know, there's the line, I think we'll have it come up later, in a musty old hall. You know, that's where they put the bell. He actually was invited up there for the ringing once, and when he got there, he realized, this isn't a musty old hall. It's more rustic. So when he would do live performances, he would sing a rustic old hall. Interesting, I thought, that artists do that and realize that. At 7 p.m., the Anderson, remember, traveling with it, gives navigation instructions to the radarless Fitzgerald up ahead. And the Anderson's first mate asks, oh, and by the way, how are you making out with your problems? You know, I always, as I read that out loud, I always just kind of imagine as a second thought, oh, by the way, how are you making out with your problems anyway? And the reply is, we are holding our own. And immediately after that, a squall line, a snow squall comes passing through the Anderson. And again, remember this is 1975? When that snow squall comes through and hits the Anderson, its radars can't penetrate it. So it loses sight of what's up ahead. Today's radars would penetrate it, but in 75 they couldn't. And so they lost the sight of the Fitzgerald. And of course, just as Doug says, we experience snow squalls here when they come through, and then they're over. And a lot of times it's beautiful outside. Now it's cold, but no clouds, no precipitation. You can see the stars. And clearly that's what happens after this snow squall at 7:30. And for the first time, they can see visually beautifully. They don't need the radar to see the Anderson, to see the Fitzgerald. The only problem is the Fitzgerald's not there anymore. Within 5 to 10 minutes, when that squall line's going by and there's no radar to detect it, it goes down. And there's no indication of how or why. It's just gone. No radar blip. No sights, no radio contact, no lights come from the ship as well. Captain Cooper searches for the Fitzgerald. Think about it, 729 ore freighter in the middle of a lake. Where could that go in 10 minutes and not see any sight of it? So after a bit of looking and trying to find it, he'll call the Coast Guard at Sault Ste. Marie with his worst fears. This is the Anderson. I am very concerned with the welfare of the steamer Edmund Fitzgerald. I can see no lights as before, and I don't have him on radar. I just hope he didn't take a nosedive. Fitzgerald's gone. And nothing, again, we don't know how it go down. There's no survivors. The Anderson, to their credit, I think is amazing. The Coast Guard couldn't get out. So the Coast Guard asked the Anderson to turn around and go look for it. So 25-foot waves turning a big boat around, but they did it, right? Because that's what they do. And when they did it, the only thing they really found was these 2 lifeboats. Well, 1.5 lifeboats. So they found 1/2, and then another lifeboat. And by the condition of those lifeboats, they know they didn't try and launch them. That they just got ripped off of their holding when the boats went down. That's why they look so destroyed. Also, there were no distress signals issued, and remember, 10 minutes just before, we're holding our own. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say that the 8 Whitefish Bay, if they put 15 more miles behind them, they might have split up, or they might have capsized, they might have broke deep into water. Again, what he's reflecting in here in the song, I think, is we don't really know how they went down. There's a bunch of theories, and some of the theories have been thrown out, like aliens. There was a theory that the aliens took it away until they found the boat on the bottom, and then it was like, well, that theory's gone. So what happened? Again, there are a couple of theories from the Marine Casualty Report, which I have here if you want to peruse it. But again, there were no survivors, there were no witnesses, so we'll never know. We'll always just be trying to piece it together. The report suggests that the Fitzgerald was taking on water due to earlier damage from the storm, and then around 7:15, it plunged headfirst into a large wave and sank abruptly. And as they say, the loss of buoyancy and stability, which results from massive flooding. Right? We know they have flooding. That's why they had their list and why they had their pumps going. As part of that report, they had 2 sketches of what it looks like. It was found in 500 feet of water. And this is basically part of the bow. You can see the damage up here implies, or the conclusions are that when it went down, that bow just smashed into the bottom, and that's why that damage was there. The other part of the boat is flipped upside down, so it's on its deck. So it's flipped around. Again, it's been torn apart in some way for some reason. When you look at how they are orientated together, this is what it looks like. So here is the bow part, 275 feet long, and there's the stern part, 253 feet long. And notice I don't say the bow half or the stern half, because if you add those together, you're still missing 250 feet. So the whole middle of the boat has been disintegrated when it went down. And this circle dotted line in here is the approximate area of some of the wreckage. So where they found some of the taconite pellets are scattered over in that area. There's been a couple of investigations to go down and look at the ship besides what the Marine Casualty Report did, the Coast Guard did in 1976. It is now looked at. The last one to go down there was to get the bell. So they recovered the bell, and it's now up in the museum, the Great Lakes Museum up north. And they replaced another bell down there, identical to the bell, with the names of the 29 sailors on that bell. Put down there. Now it's classified as a grave site. It's actually in Canadian waters. And so no one's been allowed to go down there and investigate. And interest is getting, particularly now that it's 50 years later, there's a lot of interest in trying to get down there with modern tools. So instead of going down there looking and drawing, you can do 3D modeling of the entire ship, and that might be able to help figure out how did it actually go down. With some of the ships, you can imagine getting those 2 parts and putting them together. There are a number of theories of how did the ship go down, how was it getting that massive flooding. One is the problem with the hatch covers, water getting in through the hatch covers, being damaged in some way. Bottoming out or grounding at 6 fathoms shoals. Remember, it took that path through Caribou Island in that area. The Anderson didn't like, the captain of the Anderson thought that they were a little bit too close to 6 fathom shoals, and that's why that theory came up. Of course, we can never confirm it, because you can look at the stern part and see if there's any damage to the bottom there, but you can't do it for the bow part because that's underwater. I mean, that's on land, so we don't really know if it hit or not. Stress fractures or structural problems in the boat. There were stress problems identified in the Fitzgerald that was supposed to be fixed that year, and they weren't. You know, there was the promise of, okay, we'll do it in 1976, during when we were doing it over, instead of doing it now. So there was a question about, did those stress fractures lead to cracks that allowed water to get in to where the cargo bay is as well. And then a rogue wave. Yeah.
Oh, you've got that nice picture there. What's the location of the various parts of the ship, I guess? The sleeping quarters, where they run it from?
So, I'm sorry, what parts of the ship you're asking?
What, like in the front there,
Yeah.
the top where all those small windows are, that's where they're running it from, I take it. And below that would be like rest or bedrooms and.
Oh, yeah, so the crew would be down in the hall, some up in here. The pilots, I think, were actually back here.
Really?
Because that's where the engines are.
Okay, because nobody's ever explained that. You've got this huge, humongous ship.
Yeah, the other thing that I didn't mention is that I think it was in '69, they put in bow thrusters here as well on the side so that you could steer it better as well by pushing the bow one way or the other. And that allows you to get in tighter spots as well.
You mean they added bow thrusters?
They added bow thrusters in 1969.
They drilled through the hull, too. Did they put the bow thrusters right?
Well, they would have to, right, yeah,
Yeah.
because they would have to be inside, yeah. So another question about is that weakening it or
When
not.
they did that, yeah.
Yeah. I think there were more concerns about some of the stress fractures in the hull due to all the twisting. And again, the fact, the way that it was built was welded together, 3 different sections brought together and then welded, not riveted, which is more typical of those big ships.
Wasn't she scheduled to have some of that repaired the next season?
Yes.
And dry dock?
Yes. They were supposed to do it that summer, but they didn't. By the way, as you'll learn, since we're on that, now if it needs to be repaired, you're not going out unless it's repaired. That's one of the lessons learned.
That's one of the rules they made after.
Right, they made that afterwards. Same thing with that Pilsner line. If you're designed for this big, no, sorry, you can't add another 3 feet to it. Of course, weather guy, the other big thing that they never talk about, although they're starting to talk more about it now, was the weather. It was that beautiful day like it was on the 9th, the ship probably wouldn't have gone down. Or if they did, they probably would have had time to abandon ship. So the fact that there was such nasty weather also played a big role in the ship coming down as well. As I said, in 2006 and in other times, we re-examined the storm, and again, not taking the data we have today, but taking the data that was available then, not using the satellite data because they didn't have access to it, and putting it in today's models. And what they found is that the prediction was much more accurate. And in fact, when you look at the storm during those days, this is where the Fitzgerald went down. It went down where the wave heights were greater than 25 feet. And it was the worst point in the storm when that ship went down, according to the model prediction. In a musty old hall in Detroit, they prayed in the Maritime Sailors Cathedral. The church bell chimed. They rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down to the big lake they call Kichigumi. Superior, they said, never gives up again when the gales of November come early. So as I said, they went down and recuperated the bell. That was the last trip down there. And in 1995, and again, they put the other bell down there with the names of the 29 sailors that went down. Again, Here are the list of the names, their ages, and what their job was, and where they were from. And as I point out, this is a great mystery, but again, we lost 29 people. That loss clearly goes beyond, the 29 people who lost their lives. As we've been talking about every now and then here, there are obviously changes that now are helping to, this is the last shipwreck since Fitzgerald. There haven't been any others, big ships like this. And there's a number of reasons why for that. Not only new shipping regulations, but actually ones that are enforced. You need now have to have mandatory survival suits for each individuals. Depth finders, right? Let's make sure you don't hit the fathom shores. If you're concerned about that, find a way to do it. The way that they did it back then, rock over the end with the string tied to it. And then they pull it out. That's how they did the depth back then. It's crazy, right? But that's what they did. Now, no. Now also positioning systems, the ships have to have them. Originally it was Loran. I'm guessing many of you remember the Loran system. That was before the GPS. Now they have GPS, of course, just like our phones. They know where they are all the time. Increase freeboard, right? You're not allowed to all of a sudden just increase that load line. You got to be put the load line where the ship was designed, engineered for. And of course, more frequent inspections of vessels. And if they find something wrong, you got to fix it. You can't go out. And of course, NOAA revised its weather prediction. One, not just weather prediction, but also how it predicts wave heights. We're much better at doing that now than we were back in 1975. And of course, the weather forecasting has gotten a lot better. This was a storm of November 9th to 11th. Again, same time period. Same kind of storm. You look at this and the older NOAA satellite of that storm in 1998. I don't know if any of you were here around for that. I know I was in Madison, and I was thrilled about it, because I could see all those pressure lines going up. Wind speeds were getting up to 55, 60 miles per hour. I went out after class and was just like, yeah, I gotta do that stand, lean into the wind, and the wind hold you up. And then I looked at our 15-story building with its radar antenna up on top, and just thought, uh-oh. Maybe being outside is not such a good thing. This storm was so well forecast, right? That's why I knew it was coming. I wanted to go out and stand in that wind and see if it could knock me over. 10 people, as it turned out. This was also a killer. It killed 10 people, but not like these other storms where it's a whole bunch of people. They were killed, 9 were killed by flying debris. So the National Weather Service keeps track of that. Apparently somebody was blown over into a body of water and drowned. But again, these are kind of scattered, not a big ship going down or a bunch of duck hunters being caught. And that's because we've gotten so much better at weather forecasting. As I said, 5-6 day forecast today, that's the kind of accuracy we had back when there was only 1 day forecast back in 1975. So we've gotten a whole week better at forecasting in terms of accuracy. And with that, I will say the legend will live on because I don't think we're ever going to figure it out. If they ever get down there and can take 3-dimensional pictures of it, they may be able to figure out and actually get out of arguing, did it break apart on the surface or did it break apart down on the bottom? I think most people now are going with it broke apart really quickly at the surface and then both parts went down really quickly. And the debris field tends to support that as well. And with that, I am happy to take any more questions. Yes?
Haven't the Canadians restricted
Yes.
access to the wreck?
Yeah, you can't get down to the wreck anymore. But that doesn't mean people aren't trying to get down there. So they're not doing
It's in
it.
Canadian water, right?
Yes, it is in Canadian waters, yeah. So they're arguing, we need to get down there with today's technologies so that rather than just taking pictures, we can do a scanner and get a 3-dimensional model of what's down there. Of course, it's been 50 years, so I think there's a lot of mud down there as well. Yeah,
You mentioned that the boat apparently went down very rapidly, and that the crew probably didn't know exactly the situation they were in. Is there speculation that perhaps the captain may have known, because he was in communication with the Anderson and he was right there with as much data as he had? Could he have been? Does anybody speculate? I suppose it's just speculation. And
Yeah, I
I'm
do.
asking you the question as speculating.
Yeah, so I would speculate he did not know what was
Okay.
going on. I mean, he knew they were endangered, he knew they were taking on water. I don't think he knew the damage that had occurred to the boat. You know, we're holding our own, you know,
Yeah.
was one of them. I think the other thing why he said this is the roughest seas I've ever been in, I think it's because they're taking on water, it's getting into the cargo holds, so they're absorbing and filling up air spaces, so the boat is getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And so those waves are now looking bigger and bigger and bigger because he's sitting lower and lower. So I think he's thinking the waves are really big, not, oh, I'm lower in the water, and that's why the waves look taller. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because when she was asking that question, I had just been thinking like even if the captain thought that they were holding their own, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that some of the guys at least figured that they weren't going to make it, as the song implies, because I mean it does say it's 7 p.m. because it does imagine like the hatchway caving in at 7 p.m. and also on that I thought it was interesting that you said that the families found that line offensive because they thought it implied that their deceased relatives hadn't done their job properly. But then later on, you admitted that we still haven't ruled out that might have happened for whatever reason. And it's like, you know, 7 p.m. to it just going down at 7:15. That's not very much time.
No.
It's like I think some of them probably would have known that they were not going to make it out of that.
And that's a good point. And one thing I didn't mention that I meant to mention, but it's relevant to your point. At one point, when the captain's talking to the Swedish vessel, the Avovors, he is heard yelling at somebody, "Don't allow anybody on deck." Which means, some people were trying to go figure out what the heck is going on. Now, why they were on deck, we don't know. It could have been losing the rail. You know, they wanted to try and figure out maybe there was something on the deck that was sloshing back and causing that damage, and they wanted to go out and try and do something about it.
What kind of object do you think could have done that?
Anything that was floating in the lake at the time. Yeah.
So you're implying that rivets are stronger than welds, because they weld the ships together today.
In 75, that's what I'm applying. So in 1975, that was the first time they welded those 3 sections together. So they built 3 different sections and then welded them together. What they would normally do back then was rivet them together and not build them in different places and then build them and then weld them together, rivet them together. They would build them right there at the shipyard. Yeah.
Is it possible that the water from one wave washing across the deck wouldn't clear before another wave hit? And is there accumulation of water?
It could be. There was, I know when I, would swim in off Fire Island there, we would have these 3 sisters, so you'd get, every now and then you'd have these, 5-foot waves, and then all of a sudden you'd get 3 10-foot waves. Yeah, and then
One thing I don't think you talked about was the air temperature at that time. Was it freezing, and would that have let the ice build up on that ship before it went down?
So the song says freezing rain. To my knowledge, there were no observations of freezing rain. If there were, then these other boats would have been covered in ice as well. So there was snow and precipitation, but no freezing rain being observed. Because that would have been really hazardous for the other ships. Yeah.
I thought one of your slides had said, in I think it was 1984, that one of the explorations had found a body in a cork life jacket.
Yes. So that was the other thing in the, I think it was the one before the last survey. Oh, what did it come? Oh, there it is. Is it here? Yes, that one of the surveys went down there and found a body down there with a cotton life jacket.
They don't know who it was, though.
They don't know who it was, and there was some controversy about whether or not they were with the Fitzgerald or not. I didn't understand why there was a controversy, since they were down there looking at it. But I think, out of respect for that sailor, if there was any investigation, they really kept it.
That would have been routine anyway, right?
I'm sorry?
That would have been routine anyway, like wearing a life jacket.
Yeah, if you're in that kind of wave situations, I would certainly think.
Wasn't any
Why? Yeah.
Yes, I thought I heard in the last year, whether it was this summer or last year, at this time, that they actually had sent a submersible down there and had taken photographs, and that they noticed that a lot of those latches on for the hatches were deteriorated, but had failed before the ship went down. So they were already in bad shape prior to this incident.
So there was, depending on which book you read, there's a couple of things. One is, on beautiful days, what some argue who are involved with that industry is that you wouldn't spend all that time to clamp down 68 clamps on 21 hatchways if it's beautiful, right? You can do that when the ship leaves port, because otherwise time is money, right? So there's that question. There were pictures from one of those exhibitions where they looked at the hatch covers, and that's why this report concluded that that's where it was coming from. Some of them were ripped right off. Some of the clamps were damaged, and some were just sit there and not on at all, which suggested that they weren't even fully put on. So there's still the questions about what's going on with the hatch covers.
Would it have been possible or common that they would have left port without all those hatch covers let down?
That's what some of the people, on a beautiful day, if it was a nasty day, then no. But on a beautiful day, right, some guy I was talking to early in November at this conference said that they would even put the cover on and then just put the corner ones down.
Right.
And then go to the next one, and then finish it when you're on. Right. Time is money. That was their argument. Yeah.
My question is, well, if they knew this time period that the Fitzgerald went down, how often does the storms come through that area? And wouldn't that, if it is frequent, wouldn't they stop the shipping season earlier?
It's not, so we get storms frequently through the Great Lakes region. I mean, we experience every winter, we get a couple of them. These storms, these gales that are really nasty, we only get one of those every 10, 20 years or so. And at that time, and now if they're going to get a nasty storm like that, they'll harbor up. They won't try and change their route in order to try and protect themselves. Yeah.
Is there any indication that either of those two ships were actually trying to get to Whitefish Bay as opposed to St. Marie? The song says.
Right, yeah.
10 miles away.
No, the Anderson was also trying to, it had a load of talcumite too that it was trying to get to Detroit eventually.
Right,
Yeah.
but if it made sense to go to Whitefish Bay as a safety.
Oh, there was another boat, and I forget the name of it, that did harbor up in Whitefish Bay. That did not go out because the weather forecast, it was seen. I mean, it left port later, so it had more time to realize that, oh no, this is not a lake situation I want to be in. So it went to a bay and hung out until the storm went by.
Did the Anderson make it?
Yes,
But he went back up.
he went back out to look for him.
Right.
So part of the reason of the Fitzgerald going down wasn't just the storm, it was the ship was also damaged, and that allowed the water from the weather that created the conditions on the lake. But yeah, the other ships that were out there were fine. Yeah?
There's been a lot of computer modeling enhancements for structural mechanics as well. Are you aware of any reconstruction of the Edmund Fitzgerald to try to predict a failure mechanism in this kind of scenario?
That's why they want to get down there. So there has been some engineering work. I was at this conference up in Duluth on this year, November 9th, 8th and 9th, and people have done that. This is what it would look like from the pictures as well. But what they want to get down there with is these cameras now that can do three-dimensional picturing, so that they can actually run those models and try and figure out, did it break out on shore or did it go down and then break up when it hit bottom. Yeah?
If the bow of the boat was perched on the crest of one wave, and the stern would happen to be perched on the crest of another wave, the middle of the boat would be basically unsupported, and that could explain why it cracked in half.
That's one of the theories of it breaking up on the surface. Is again, it's got some stress situations on the hull that was supposed to be repaired that weren't. That boat, if you look at movies of back then of those boats when they went out, they're doing this all the time, which again is just going to cause wear and tear. Then if you got the big lakes, then yeah, if the top gets up too high, then the whole interior can collapse, and that's what the surface theory is about, is that the middle section just basically implodes, and then the two other parts of the ship go down separately. Yeah, is there a question in the back?
Just a quick anecdote. In 1979, I think 4 years after that went down, I was living up in Ashland, Wisconsin. And I recall a trip from Bayfield over to Madeline Island on the ferry. There was a rough-looking guy on a motorcycle crossing with me. I was talking with him. He claimed he was a cook on the Fitzgerald, and that a month or two before that went down, he got into a bar fight and got busted up. They replaced him. Now, I don't know whether any of that's true, but I remembered it.
I don't know if it's true or not either, but there were people who were supposed to be on the boat or normally would be on the boat that weren't for that trip for whatever reason.
I suppose they rotate crews.
They rotate crews around, or maybe a wedding is occurring in a family event or something. I imagine for those individuals, it either they felt really blessed or felt really guilty.
If it's like tugboats on Mississippi, they would work a month and then take a month off. It could have been the same.
It could have been that, yeah. I'm a little suspicious about the cook, and I only say that because I've been reading some of these new books that have come out, and some of the interviews of the VIPs that would go on in Fitzgerald say that those cooks were, you couldn't get that kind of food on the best restaurants in the areas. They were that good. So I don't know if that individual would have been one of those special cooks.
Yeah, I also lived in upstate New York, and when I lived there, everybody of a certain age told me they were at Woodstock too.
I wanted to go to Woodstock, but my parents wouldn't let me. Yeah.
I have heard that in World War II, Higgins decided to make his boats by welding, and everybody was up in arms over that because they said, no, you can't weld because they can crack. You need to rivet boats so that they have some give. Now, I don't know about the difference in the welding technology in the 70s or 60s or 50s or whatever versus what they had in World War II,
but they lost a hell of a lot of those boats.
Those boats?
Well, yeah.
They were losing those boats because they were getting shot at.
Well,
and Higgins' theory was, why build a boat to last 20 years when the average life is 6 months?
This was one of the first ones on the Great Lakes shipping that was welded. All the other ones were riveted to make sure that they were strong.
In today's welding, have x-ray, you know, check, make sure the welds were better? I don't guess.
I don't guess back in 1975.
So how good were the welds?
Right, yeah. Yeah,
Why would they have VIPs on a ship like that, a working ship?
for entertainment. So the insurance company, Northwest Mutual Insurance Company, that was one of their way to spend homage. And then once people started getting on there and realizing how good the food was, how lush the trip was, more and more people wanted to do it. So it was purely entertainment by the insurance company. All right, if you have more questions, I'm happy to stay around and answer them. Otherwise,